Today on Behind the Ops, we're joined by a founder who has mastered the art of turning operational precision into national scale. Allan Young is the founder and CEO of Art of Drawers, the premier brand of custom kitchen organizing solutions in the United States. But this isn't his first time building a category leader. Over the past 2 decades, Allan has grown not one, but two companies in the custom storage and access space from scrappy startups into the largest national brands in the industry, scaling to hundreds of locations and over 50 million in annual sales. Before Art of Drawers, he founded Genie, an Inc. 500 company that became an industry leader in custom design access solutions and built Noble Brands into a hyper-growth platform supporting more than 180 locations across the U.S. and Canada. A former U.S. Army commander, active leader with Young President's Organization, a Forbes Books author, and the CEO coach, Allan understands what it takes to build not just a business, but a repeatable, franchise-ready operating machine. Today, we're going behind the scenes of scaling niche service brands nationally, building franchise infrastructure that actually works, and how operational discipline creates joyful customer experience at scale. Let's go behind the ops to see the way that businesses really grow.
Good. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm glad you could be here. So, Ellen, let's start out with you telling everyone a little bit about yourself and your company and where we are today.
Sure. I'll start at the very beginning. When I was 5, I opened up my first business.
Nice.
I was a serial entrepreneur from age 5. I actually opened up 14 businesses before high school. And my high school guidance counselor unfortunately crushed my dreams for being an entrepreneur. This was back in the late 80s. And she told me, you can't be an entrepreneur until you go into corporate America and have a job for 20 years. Then maybe you can open up your own business after you get all that experience. And this was, late 80s was when people were, entrepreneurs were your crazy uncle who lost all of his money twice. It was before all the tech stuff happened. And now being an entrepreneur is something that is very approachable. And a lot of people do. So I ended up going to University of Richmond, went to college, got an RTC scholarship, went in the military for 5 years, active duty as an artillery officer. And as I look back on it, it was surprisingly entrepreneurial from a standpoint of, especially in combat arms, the military will give you as a platoon leader, as the commander, the mission, go take that hill or do the thing. And then you use the time and resources you have available to get it done, which is really what being an entrepreneur is figuring it out based on what you have available to you. So that was a great experience. And when I got out, I started companies again. So I started with a company, we did home automation. So this was early 2000s and right after 9/11. So there's been a couple inflection points in my career. 9/11 was one of them. Great Recession was one, and then COVID was the other. And they all kind of had the effect of everybody stayed at home and started upgrading their houses. So that was good for all those businesses I had. But the home automation one, I just really, after a year and a half, I was successful at it, but I wasn't waking up every day excited about helping people. I was just selling a lot of stuff to people who already had a lot of stuff. So I sold that business, moved up to Virginia. I was in Atlanta at the time, so I moved to Virginia where I'm from and started an indoor air quality company. So we were kind of an HVAC company. We really focused on whole house air purification, helping people with asthma, allergies, COPD, and really made a huge impact. So that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. I built it up to be I think my first year I did 1.3 million in business. I was like a 37% net profit, which I've never achieved ever since then. But I thought that was great. And it was until the Army sent me a note saying, remember, you're still a reserve officer and we're going to deploy you to the Middle East. And you have about 6 to 8 months to get ready for that deployment. So I didn't know what I was going to do after I handed over the keys to that business. And so I did what everybody does when they don't have a job. I went and got business cards printed up with my name and the word consultant underneath it. So I was a small business consultant for a little bit. And one of the companies I worked with was a small local company in Richmond, Virginia, that was selling these custom pull-out shelving units. And they had about 4 or 5 employees. They were building them, installing them. And they hired me to help them come up with an expansion plan. So what they really wanted to do is stop being a local small business and expand. They looked at franchising. we very quickly decided that was not for them because you really have to have a lot of systems and processes in place. So I came up with a dealer model where they could sell the product and manufacture it and sell it to dealers around the country. And when I came back from my deployment, I checked in with them and said, how's the plan going? They said, the plan is great. We were just waiting for you to come back and do the plan for us. So it worked out great because I didn't know what I was going to do next. I'd sell my business from before. So I became a partner and we started growing that dealer model. We grew it very quickly. We had about 50 dealers in the first year.
Wow.
So all of a sudden now we're a big manufacturing company. We're trying to scale that, and that local Richmond business wasn't getting any attention. So I agreed to take that over, and I started bringing on designers, part-time designers, interior designers, professional organizers, stay-at-home moms, and installers who are contractors. Everybody got paid a percentage of the job, and that allowed me to expand to Chicago, Milwaukee, Twin Cities, Birmingham, and Atlanta, all in about a year. And woke up one day and we are doing over 5 million in revenue. And I wasn't living in these cities, and I built out a call center at that point. We are doing all the marketing central. And I literally woke up one day and it just kind of hit me like, this is a franchise. All the systems and processes I had to put into place and technology to be able to scale this in all these different cities where we don't even live, this is something that we could sell as a franchise. So
Sure.
fall of 2008, another big inflection point is when I launched the franchise, which was terrifying to launch any kind of business during that time frame.
Right.
But it turned out to be a great opportunity because people were staying at home. Turns out a recession, our model works really well in a recession because people are doing a small, affordable upgrade, $5,000, $6,000 to upgrade their homes, and that's something that worked really well. So we were an Inc. 500 company, 2009, 10, 11, Entrepreneur 500 company during those years, scaled very quickly. Around 2016, we had gotten up to, I think almost 200 locations.
Wow.
And another point, I kind of woke up and I realized that our ability to innovate had kind of disappeared over that period of time slowly. Because once you get a couple thousand people out in the field in all these different locations, change is really, really difficult. So, my hack for that as an entrepreneur was I came up with the second brand, Art of Drawers, which is really, I looked at, there's a couple models, but the one I think everybody understands the most would be Lexus and Toyota. So Toyota decided to come out with Lexus. They did not build a new car. They just made, higher quality materials, better customer
Right.
experience, better brand. And that's really what Art of Drawers is. And the idea was that the top performers in Shelf Genie and that franchise that wanted to upgrade and innovate and still work with us on those changes would get both brands, very similar to what Toyota did with Lexus. And
Mhm.
before we could launch that, a company called Neighborly came along and wanted to buy Shelf Genie. They own about 20 to 30 home service brands. A lot of them are very recognizable names. And that made sense for my business partners. I had a couple investors early on. It had been over a decade that they've been involved. They wanted to exit. So it made sense for them. So we worked it out. I kept Art of Drawers. I kept the technology package. We built a $5 million technology package that really runs the company. Shelf Genie can use an older version of it, but we use that in Art of Drawers. And we started franchising Art of Drawers about a little over 2 years ago. And we're in, I think, 37 cities now and about 140 locations. One of the top
Wow.
10 growing franchises in the US, according to Inc. last year.
That's incredible. And what a fun story. You ebb and flow and pivot and grow, and that's kind of a neat way that's a great story for sure. Talk a little bit about the scaling that you did. So you've done it now twice consistently with a franchise type model. Talk a little bit about that and kind of where you think some of the operational keys or cruxes were when you were growing and what you learned through that.
Yeah, and it really, if you go back to that first business that scaled to 1.3 million, I was hiring employees, full-time employees. So my installers were full-time, 15 to $20 an hour folks back then. That's the rates have gone up, but they were hourly labor that would install the product. And there's a lot of inefficiency problems, a lot of turnover because just in that industry there's a lot of turnover. And then on the sales side, I was hiring full-time salespeople with a base salary, and that was limiting because you could have one, maybe two. And after you figure out that somebody with a base salary is not able to sell, it's been 3 to 6 months. You only have one or two of them. It's really hard to make that decision to let them go because it's like we've all been there with employees. Like something is better than nothing, and I don't want to have to deal with it. Kind of put it off. So uh, to build around that, to get out of that problem, which is my biggest challenge in that business, was designers that are part-time independent contractors. There's a
Right.
lot of them out there. This was it was the gig economy before Uber, which it was a little early on, but we were
Yeah.
looking for this part-time people that could do this. So stay-at-home moms, interior designers, professional organizers that want to add additional income and go out and run our appointments when they're available. So it's very flexible. So we can recruit and bring on, two, three, four, five, six of them because we don't have overhead. The ones that perform do really well from a compensation standpoint. And
Sure.
then on the installer side, came up with an installer program where installers get a percentage of the job. They end up getting $50 to $70 an hour if they're efficient, but they're getting a percentage and they get paid after it's installed and the customer's happy and the final payment's been done. So we're very aligned with our customers, and those two programs have allowed us to scale very quickly. And when we franchised, the thing I dislike the most about any business I've ever started is day one, you start a business, you only have one problem. You have a lot of things to do, but you only have one problem. It's a sales problem.
Right.
And as soon as I would figure out the sales problem, which is what I really like to do, all of a sudden you have an operations problem. And you go fix the operations problem, and then now you have a lot of capacity, and then you have a sales problem again.
Yeah.
And that pendulum swings very rapidly. You want it in the middle, but it's never in the middle. It's just one or the other. And I like to focus on growth. So as I built out Shelf Genie, now Art of Drawers, we do all the operational tasks for our franchise partners. They do have some things to do, but we want to take as much of that off their plate. So we have a centralized call center that schedules all the appointments, takes all the inbound calls, a marketing department that does all the media buying for them. They just decide what they want to spend the money on. They execute on all the ads and the contracts, and that gets the phone to ring. And then we're scheduling the appointments, and we have a whole order management group that manages all their orders, make sure everything's handled with their installers.
Right.
So they don't have to get as involved. In the beginning, they have to learn all that. But the long-term goal is their only thing they have to focus on is building a local design team. And the other thing they could focus on is local events. That's something that they need to do in their market. So everything from the big home shows to the smaller art festivals, farmers markets, they have event specialists that go out and do that.
Very nice. So on the when as you're growing, the variability to value equation kind of changes, right? So as your value grows, your variability might increase typically. So talk a little bit about that as you went from one to, what did you say, 140 locations. Where did you notice that variability, and did it override your value, and what did you have to change to bring it back?
I think the biggest challenge was scaling so quickly with Art of Drawers. It didn't happen with Shelf Genie. That was more organic growth that happened over a decade. We got to Art of Drawers got to where Shelf Genie was in 2 years, what took 10 years to build. So we scaled very quickly, bringing on, I think we've got 40 franchise partners at this point, and in about a 2 year period.
Gotcha.
So the challenge there was, as a franchisor, we make money on our franchisees' revenue.
Okay.
And if they're selling really well and there's a lot of revenue, we get a percentage of that. But in the beginning, it's upside down because you need to staff and bring on a team that can support that, and kind of get ahead of the curve. And the biggest challenge was how far ahead of that curve can we get with all new franchise partners who are just starting to sell, just starting to get the revenue up. So that's been the biggest challenges, I think, in the first year, even 6 months. We brought in all these people and we didn't know exactly what we needed. We had to train them and get them out there and supporting them and just figuring out what that looked like, and
Yeah.
just ended up reinvesting a lot in infrastructure to get way ahead of the curve, which cost a lot of money. But if
Mhm.
you don't spend that and if you don't get there, then your franchisees will struggle and they don't
Right.
make it, and it just kind of all sort of falls apart. So
Right.
we had to invest a lot in infrastructure upfront, more than we thought because of the growth.
Okay. So when you go out and you bring in these franchisees, I'm sure there's a certain culture because you do kind of have a centralized core model. It seems like your culture is very important, and especially it's kind of an oddity, honestly, in a franchise with this kind of situation with as big as you are. How did you kind of streamline that? How do you take that culture from what you have built in the core and take it out to 100 and plus locations?
Yeah, that's the other big lesson I learned from Shelf Genie. I didn't know, we launched fall of 2008. The word culture and values wasn't a big thing back then, especially from an entrepreneurial side of things. And I remember I had
Right.
a in probably like 2013 or 2014, a CEO coach. He's like, "Okay, what are your values?" I'm like, "I don't know, work hard, get stuff done." Um, like, no, you need to have values, and that's what your culture is those values. So, the challenge then was we had 20 to 30 people at least in the home office at that standpoint, and we had a lot of franchise partners. And the hard lesson I learned was implementing a culture when you don't have one, with that many people is extremely difficult. In fact,
Sure.
when we did it, I ended up having 98% turnover in my home office organization in about a
Oh,
year and a half to 2-year period, all intentional. But when you don't
wow.
have a culture, and like this is our culture and our values. Most people don't fit in, but you have some that at the bottom are very clearly not going to fit into that new culture.
Yeah.
So you have to let them go, find other opportunities. You bring other people in that you are intentionally selling on this culture. Like, this is what we're all about. This is what a good fit looks like. You're hiring
Right.
on that culture. So then you bring in, you replace the bottom 20, bring in the top 20 that does like those values. Now, all of a sudden, you've got 20% of your organization that really is a culture fit. So then another bottom 20 quickly emerges. And you do
Hmm.
the same thing and over again until, yeah, about a year and a half to 2 years later, we had brought an entire new group of people that wanted to live in that culture and those values. So with Art of Drawers, I started with that in the very beginning. And we spend a lot of time on culture. We hire on culture. We've got 3 core values: think like an entrepreneur, act as one team, and deliver a wow experience to our customers. But underneath those, we've clearly defined those. There's probably about 5 to 7 descriptors underneath each one that are very, the qualitative. They're not as quantitative. So it's hard for me to say, you're not acting like one team. What does that really mean? So we define, one of them is be vulnerable, ask for help. That's one that people really struggle with, because they
Hmm.
don't want to look like they don't know what they're doing,
Right.
or it's okay to call timeout. So as we define those, then we can hire on that, but then we can coach on that. So our quarterly reviews, if someone's struggling in our culture, we can sit down and we can give specific examples where you weren't doing that. And I believe you can coach anybody into the culture if they want to be a part of it. But
Hmm.
every culture isn't for everybody because they don't want to be a part of it. The analogy I always give is if you take a top NBA basketball player and you put them in a rugby game, they're not going to perform very well, more than likely.
More than
Um,
likely.
yeah, I think every company culture is a different type of sport. So it's not about, hey, you're not an A player. You're just not an A player in this culture. And our culture is very fast. It's high paced. It's very different than, a large corporation, where people are very siloed. Like, you're going to be asked to do all kinds of things, and it's very fluid, and there's a lot of change. Grow or die is one of ours, being uncomfortable with the status quo. So we bring in people that believe in that or want to believe in it, and that makes the retention a lot easier. But we also protect it. So if someone's not a culture fit, you've really got to have that conversation and protect that culture in the very beginning.
Yeah, it's critical, especially, in any business, especially anymore with the way that the values have become such a valuable part of what you do. You have to have a culture and you have to enforce that culture. So if on a 98% split on your staff, as founder, operator, head guy in charge of everything, how did that sit with you? How did you start to, I mean, I'm sure as you dropped 20 and gained 20 and lost 20 and gained 20, your role and responsibility had to have been a winding road. How did you kind of judge that, balance that, start to figure that out? And then as you got the right people engaged, how was it delegating out? I know there's a couple questions in there, but I'm curious how your journey was through that.
Yeah, I think at the beginning, one of the things I learned, very tough lesson was, at the beginning, and I had you start you start a business and you hire somebody to help you, and then you hire a couple other people to help you. Then you get enough of the people are helping you that you need a leader to manage those people. So you get a manager, and then you have a couple managers. Now you need to get a director to manage some of those people, and then once you get directors, you need VPs or C-level folks. So we had turned into a pyramid of 3 or 4 layers of leadership between me and the people outside the furthest out in the organization. And one of the things I learned that was difficult to look back on was in the beginning that turnover was with the people in the front lines, the people actually doing the work that were like they're not a culture fit. um, what it turned out to be is as we went through that process is the leadership team wasn't the right culture fit. And I remember I did a skip level meeting. Are you familiar with skip level?
I guess, but please share.
Yes. It's where you meet with it's me and the people furthest out in the organization. So there's like 15 to 20 people that I got together with. Um, and I remember as I'm talking to them, like we were aligned. I was very aligned with that group. And the reality was between me and them, there's somewhere along the way, it doesn't, you've got all these different layers. It's the weakest link. If there's one leader in that chain that's not aligned with that, that's where it goes wrong. So that's one of the things I realized is if you get culture right, everything's a lot easier. And if you get culture right, you can teach anybody to do anything if they want to learn it. It's so the people on the front lines, they just didn't have the right leadership. We didn't have the right leadership in place that was instilling that culture or just really leading well. So I, I learned, and I was fortunate enough at the exit with Shelf Genie to have the financial ability to build a senior leadership team first and let them build it out, because it's hard when you hire some really good people and then you hire a leader to report to them. If you don't get the leader right, then the people that you had originally that were performing well start to suffer. And picking the right leaders is hard, really hard to do, because that's a skill you can teach, but it's a really hard one to teach. And I don't have enough time as quickly as we're growing to take someone that can't lead well and teach them how to lead well in the time frame that we need them to. So I think building that leadership team out from the top down to the bottom made it a lot easier.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think that would be. It is always the hardest part, right? Is who's to the left and who's to the right, and do they do what I need them to do at
Right.
any level? So when you look at one of the things that I work on with a lot of my clients is the customer journey map. So where is your customer journey map? Where are you in the customer journey map? And I have people who've never done one. I have them that they've done one and left it on the shelf for 20 years. How does that fit into your model? Do you use the customer journey map, and what does it look like for you as you start to build out even more franchises?
Well, we have two customer journey maps. We have the end customer who, sees us online or sees us at a home show or in an ad and calls us, and we go out and do a design consultation. Once they decide to purchase, our installer comes out and does the measurements, and we build it, and they come out and do the final install. And then we do a final step where we call it a wow tour, where the designer, the salesperson goes back out and visits with the customer after they're completely happy and excited, and that's where we get referrals and testimonials and just a lot of really cool things happen there. Most companies don't go back. The salesperson doesn't go back afterwards.
Right.
That customer journey and experience is extremely important to us. We have a net promoter score of 82. So if you know net promoter,
That is
the
very high.
this company that, we beat out Apple and all these big brands. You're typically in the 70s. So we really focus on that customer experience, which means we need to have great people. I always look at Cirque du Soleil and Zappos are the two I look at from a customer service standpoint that I really want to emulate. Cirque du Soleil, if there's the worst business model probably in the last 100 years would be a circus. Even Ringling Brothers, the best brand out there, went out of business because it's just not a good business model anymore.
Right.
Except for Cirque du Soleil. Cirque du Soleil is a circus. They've just figured out how to make it all about the experience. And that's why people still spend $140 to sit in the nosebleed section, because it's all about that experience they deliver. And
Yeah.
Zappos had to figure out a way to get people to buy shoes online, which is very normal now. But when they started doing it, it was a crazy idea. Who would buy shoes without looking at them and trying them on? And the only way they could overcome that is had that call center that when you call in and talk to them, that experience had to be insanely good. And back then Amazon bought them, so it's definitely changed. But back then you could
Yeah.
call and say, I want to order a pizza. And without hesitation, let's say, where do you live? What's your zip code? And they would order a pizza for you. They would tell you what the weather is. They would do anything and everything for
Know
you.
that.
So we make everything about that customer experience. So that's the customer journey for our consumers, but we also have a dual role of supporting our franchise partners. So what does that look like when we select them and they select us, and we award that territory to training them to make sure they know how to build those teams and ultimately deliver. They're the ones that deliver that customer experience. So we've got to work with them on that. And they're not customers, they're partners, but we have to make sure that journey works or the other one doesn't.
Absolutely. And I would think that would be probably even more critical to make sure that it's updated because as you said, right, business models go out. So making sure that your business model stays right in the middle of everything that you want it to be. When
Right.
you look at the intentionality of growing those what does that look like? Are you set for we're going to hit this number? Are you looking at a specific growth? What does the future look like?
I've never set a number. My
Okay.
number is many qualified franchise partners that we believe are going to be successful. And we don't always get that right. The franchise partner, no one goes into a franchise thinking they're not going to be successful, and we don't bring someone in thinking they're not going to be successful. But overall, we have a pretty good success rate with bringing in the right people. But that's the key is if there's only one franchise in a year that we think franchise partner is going to be able to do well, then we're gonna sell one. We're going to award one franchise. So we're just really fortunate because what I've done with Shelf Genie, and we work with a lot of franchise consultants, which franchise consultants are kind of brokers, very similar to a realtor. You wouldn't go out and you'd probably get a realtor to help you find the right house. There's
Right.
people out there to help you find the right franchise. They knew me with Shelf Genie. They knew the model. So that's one of the reasons we scaled very quickly. But there's no franchise fee in the world that's worth bringing in somebody that you know isn't going to be a good fit.
Absolutely.
It's just difficult for everybody. So, and we don't make a lot of money on selling franchises. That goes to a lot of different places that aren't us, and sales and consultants and marketing. So we really focus on finding the right people. So the right number is how many of the right people can we find in the areas that we have available.
So if you maybe it's good or bad, but let's pretend for a second you double tomorrow. What would be one of your concerns? What operationally would you have to go and what do you think you would have to go and pay attention to most?
Yeah. Well, we're right now. We're at, I think last month was 118% growth. We're at over 300% growth last year, or 250. So yeah, we're in that world right now, and really it's supporting our franchise partners. They're the ones out there doing it. So how do we make sure we have a home office team? And that's the struggle. You're always going to have a struggle in finding bringing in the right people, and getting culture right in the office. If we have the right people in the right seats, then again, culture fit, and they're good. They get it one and have the capacity to do the job they're in. Everything's easy, but it's not easy to get there. It's not easy to find those right people and structure it to keep up with that growth. But the good news is once we find franchise partners, once they get their initial training, um, the nice thing is once you get some successful franchise partners, they start learning from each other. So that's been probably the biggest challenge we've had is everybody in our system right now is under 2 years old as far as how long they've been in their business, probably on average about a year. So they don't have a lot of older brothers and sisters to learn from.
Right.
Those are starting to emerge. So that's the cool thing about franchising. Once you get it going, is it's almost like machine learning. If you're a great franchise partner, you come up with an idea, we're like, great, let's work on that, and it works, or you come up with it on your own. We can take that and spread that throughout the system as a best practice. Conversely, if you run across something that doesn't work, we can make sure that we stop others or ask others to not do it, so they don't run into that wall themselves.
Right. That's a great lessons learned program, right? We
Yeah.
did that. No, don't try that. So, as a final kind of thought for our guests, let's let's see the antithesis of your guidance counselor. And what would you tell people who want to be an entrepreneur now that entrepreneurship is not a crazy uncle? What's the thing that you would tell them to go do? And obviously, the flip side, what would you tell them to watch? What would you tell them you've learned in your journey?
Yeah, yeah. I think anybody can own a business. In fact, that's one of the ways we recruit with our values. We're very entrepreneurial, and in our size company, we can. if you join the marketing company, you want to sit on a financial meeting and look at the P&L and learn how to read a balance sheet. We're a very open book with that. Or you want to spend time with operations. So that's one of the things that how we recruit is I can say, hey, we'll bring you in, and in the next couple of years, we don't expect people to work for us for 40 years or 10 years. That those days are long gone. No one's getting gold watches anymore. So we
No.
know we're going to come through and transition. And if you ever do in the next couple of years want to start your own business, you don't have to keep that a secret. Let us know. I'm totally happy with supporting people to go do that, to own their own business. But I think understanding how a business works is really critical. You don't have to be good at all of it, but understanding some of those components, or having people that can help mentor you and explain those things, because you're typically going to be good at selling or operations. People are rarely good at all those things. So just making sure that you have the resources or understanding of where to go to find that team and build it out. And then it's something that you're passionate about. And I think passionate about is, it doesn't have to be your favorite hobby. In fact, probably one of the worst ways to lose your, or the quickest ways to lose your hobby and the thing you love is to do it as a business. But it needs to be something you're passionate about. I've always found like are you passionate about helping this customer and doing the thing you're doing? Or, if it's cutting hair, there's very few people that, decide, as they're growing up wanted to own, 5 Great Clips franchises or have a hair salon in most cases. So it's about scale and building a team. And I think you've got to really be focused on, wanting to build the thing that you're starting and understanding what that scale looks like over time, and not kind of just every day you wake up and like, all right, I have 2 people, now I have 3 people. And you really have to look at what's your goal down the road. What does that look like? And how am I going to get there? And am I going to want to get there? That's one of the challenges I had in Shelf Genie, and we're going to start having our drawers is, in our model. Once you get designers, installers, all of a sudden you get to a point where you're making a good income and you've got a team that's executing. And what's your reason for continuing to want to build more? And that's one of the things I talk openly to our franchise partners about is everybody wants to make millions of dollars, but everybody has a number that's much lower than that when they start making it and their business is good. Like, what's your reason to want to grow beyond that? Or that could be your goal, that I'm going to get it up to, 5, 6, 7 employees and get an income of X dollars. And that's where I want to be. So I can not have to be in the business as much, and focus on it. So I think understanding your long-term goals, is really critical, and making sure you're going to be passionate about that growth and that you're not going to burn out. And, the final thing I would say is just a lot of grit, passion, determination is required, because, you start out super excited. And after you're somewhere in the first week, it all of a sudden is like, what did I just do? And this is, what I get myself into. And the highs are very high and the lows are very low, and the lows, far outpace in number the highs that you have. So you really have to be able to get through it and have that passion to get up every time you're knocked down, and you'll get knocked down a lot. Overcome different obstacles that you're going to come across. And, that's where I see people struggle, is they come across a problem and they get stuck. And to me, a problem is a wall, and you have to figure out, am I going to go over it, to the left or right of it? I'm going to dig under it or blow through it. Like one of those things has to happen.
What works?
And you always find that, that's where you figure it out. You may not get it right on your first time. Being okay with failure, I think, is really critical. And learning how to celebrate that failure, not in the moment. It never feels good in the moment. Every failure in business I've ever had, after I got through it, and sometimes it took a lot of different iterations to figure out how to get through it. When I look back on it, we always ended up in a better place than we were before that problem. But understanding that and being able to go through that, I think is probably the biggest challenge overall.
I would agree. I would agree. My dad has always said, you don't fail unless you don't learn something from the mistakes you made. So I think that that's a huge thing, that entrepreneurs fail, right? We don't see that lesson learned until the end of it. So it's really, really hard. But thank you, Alan, for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing all your stories. It was great. And I can't wait to see where you take Art of Drawers.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great day.